Greetings, community. We are
1-2
Comic Talk, and it's Artist Alley. I know it's on a little bit of different day, but look at all these pretty graphics. Got to have it on a Thursday. So, hey, not only that, but we had brought back a special guest that, well, kind of means a lot to us as far as the storyline is concerned. And also, he's a great guy, and I love the writing. I love the personality. And, it's just, now that we got all these pretty graphics, how do you bring him back? So, hey, before we do so, have to do what we always do and bring in a very special co-host of ours, Miss CHRISTIE SHINN.
Hello, how's it going?
Hi, CHRISTIE. How are you?
Doing okay. It's been kind of a week, but it's been okay. Just been going forward, moving ahead.
Well, you look good.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, and I've been watching you through the week, and like you said, you've been doing your lunch hours every day, and you're still, you're just trudging right through everything. So it's hard to notice that anything's weighing down on you.
Yeah, it's like an hour. So I kind of just go and do it for an hour, and then I kind of tune out for the rest of it and kind of regroup on things, So it's kind of weird. Like, people think, oh, you're on all the time. It's like, not all the time. Like, sometimes after a show, I'm just quiet and I don't want to do anything. It's weird how it takes that out of you.
Now, you know what? I get it. And there's actually a lot of people in the community that get it. And, because there's a lot of the guests and those in the chat right now, they also have their own shows, and I'm sure they can relate. It takes a lot, especially, I don't know anyone other than our great JB, our Discovery Bay network, that's doing as much work as you every day. He's the only person I know that's putting in as much work as you do. You know what I mean? And yes, he's a machine too. He cracks me up, that guy. But hey, CHRISTIE, how about we do this? How about we bring in a special guest that we've had on our show before? You know them, and I know him, and he's been a person that's touched in the story. It means a lot to both Khalees and I, and it's something that we wanted, not only, I guess, just the immediate community to know, but if I could reach out to the world and have them read this book, if nothing else, for the message. But I can go on forever. How about we do this? Let's bring in our guest, Mr. Dillon Gilbertson.
Hey, Dillon.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing good. How about
Dillon,
you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired. I've been working hard, but yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
We're very glad to have you, especially with all these pretty graphics. What do you think? It's kind of cool, huh?
Yeah, this looks amazing. This is a step in the right direction. I'm digging it.
I agree. Finally, we can have guests such as yourself and be able to really, showcase what they do properly. And I'm just glad that you can come back on here and talk about a story that we've spoke about before. But before we do, if I may, for those in the chat, for those out there in the community that may not know exactly who you are and what you do, could you please tell the community who Dillon Gilbertson is?
Well, Dillon Gilbertson is a comic book writer. He lives in San Diego, California right now. He's originally from Oregon. He has written a bunch of short horror stories. Horror is what he does the most. He's been recently doing some more sci-fi. He's starting a young adult book that we can talk about at some point, possibly. And he's just a man living the dream right now.
That's awesome, man. And again, I first met you some months ago. I want to say at the beginning of the year, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I think we met when Sweetheart, the release day of Sweetheart #1. We met at the Comic Bug in March.
I would say that's correct. And
yeah.
I knew very little about the solicitation of this book. So as opposed to really getting into that book in particular, I only recently have been going over more of your original works that led to this story. So before, if we may, get into Sweetheart, can we kind of talk about some of the books that led up to the creation of this? And more specifically, I want to break it down in kind of two categories. And what I mean by that is I noticed you have a love for both horror and sci-fi, but I kind of want to break that down in two different things, if I may.
Okay, sure.
first, let's get into the sci-fi. For me, that's new. I wasn't really aware that you're that big in the sci-fi, and I know we're going to pick this back up later on. So if you could tell us of your first introduction and first love of sci-fi.
It's so when I got into writing comics, it was sort of through science in a way. So when I was in college, I was taking a lot of anatomy classes, a lot of chemistry courses and things like that. And I had this habit of when you hear something new and exciting, I would imagine these weird scenarios that in no way could ever actually happen. And then those sort of became back doors into fun story ideas. And so one of the comics that I first wrote was Bear Arm Baby, which you could kind of argue is kind of sci-fi, but it's kind of horror comedy-esque, just about this mishap with a prenatal surgery where this baby gets bear DNA spilled onto itself, and it grows bear arms. And it's this ridiculous notion, and that's sort of what I liked about comics is just taking these weird ideas and running with them. And so because my introduction into writing comics was because of science, misappropriated science as it was, it just sort of became a natural progression of writing more sci-fi stories. And so I think that's kind of science and sci-fi is what I have to thank for getting me into comics, I think.
Now, presently, right now, are you thinking about incorporating more stories that are science and science fiction based into your future stories?
Yeah. So we have a story called Draft Dodger that we've been working on for a while that it uses a lot of environmental science, and not just in the sense of like climate change, but just how like botany, how a lot of plants function, and how a lot of different kinds of plants will often function as animals. And so there's some horror elements sprinkled in there as well. But yeah, so Draft Dodger is about this girl who is trying to escape to Canada to find her estranged father because the government thinks that they own her. They think they have property over her body because the world's sort of in disarray right now, and they need as many healthy bodies as possible. And so she's trying to escape, but then as she goes further north through the United States, she discovers just how torn up the landscape is, and how the plant life has evolved, and how the people have evolved with the plant life. And so that's going to have a lot of sci-fi elements in it. Prior to that, I did a short story with Michael Kuss. He's an awesome comic artist that I met on Twitter called Albert Seven. Mm-hmm. About this monkey who so in real life, this is a true story. So back in the 60s, when NASA was first testing, trying to experiment with space flight and see how biological creatures would handle space flight, they launched 7 monkeys, or sorry, I think it was 6 monkeys, all named Albert, and they're just Albert 1 through 5, and then they launched a 6th one that didn't really make it. They renamed the monkey into Yorick, which we kind of get into in the story. But anyway, and so I thought about that. I was like, what if they're all really the same monkey? And I sort of borrowed some elements from the Doomsday storyline from DC, where Doomsday was repeatedly killed and then cloned to try and fine-tune its biology to live in these harsh conditions. And so we sort of took that idea and applied it to this real-life scenario. But the twist is that Albert in this story retains all of his memories from his previous lives. And so it's sort of this tortured soul thing, and he sort of learns as he goes along how to escape and things like that. It's a really fun story. I had a lot of fun doing it. That story kind of has a special place in my heart.
You know what I'm noticing also is, even though that which I'm going to go ahead and speak now about the horror aspect, even though you're still talking as science-based, you still twist it into kind of something that grabs you and clinches you, which you Some people just choose to use humor. Some people choose to use little epiphanies, or in Japanese, satori, enlightenment aspects, and you choose to use horror as your message, and as your, how should I say, your way of channeling your information. So I guess what I'm getting at is, what I'm noticing is your underlining love for horror, and what you use your horror as a way to deliver your message, as opposed to just using it as a shock effect. You have found it as a nice way to grab your audience now, and I noticed that as a theme throughout a lot of your writing, both in science or almost exclusively horror-based writings. Can you explain to the audience how you've been able to utilize something that is most people just use as a shock value tool, but to utilize it as a way to always deliver a message?
Yeah, so I was introduced to horror at an age that was probably way too young, by most people's standards. I started watching horror movies when I was like 4 years old, and something that I sort of clung to and really believe in is that horror has a way of teaching you to face your fears, which sounds really cliche and kind of cheesy, but if you think about it, like when you're young and you're watching a movie about a monster in the basement, like you're terrified that there's this monster in the basement, right? It's as unrealistic and far-fetched as it may seem, it's terrifying all the same. But then if you over time and convince yourself to be brave enough to go into the basement and look down there and explore it, you find out that like your fear may not be what it was all along. Like it was really just an outlandish fear. And so I think a lot of times are the challenges in our life, as real as they may be, as opposed to the monster in the basement, are sort of blown out of proportion because of our fear of our failure or what might happen because of it. If you just sort of teach yourself to look at it and work with it and really look it in the face, it might not be quite as terrifying as you originally thought. And so one of the goals that I have in my horror stories is to, in a way, not in a shock value sense, but the shock certainly does have a use there, is to make you afraid of it, like really, really put it in your face and make it terrifying, but then keep sort of digging at the layers of it and teach you that it's not quite as intimidating as it may seem. And if it is, then there are ways that you can sort of work with it. You can deal with it. And so I think horror gets overlooked a lot of times in like literary or cinema value, because they think it's just like for shock. It's sort of this shallow drivel or whatever. But I think there's a lot, even in the shallow shock value stuff. Like you can find a lot of value in these things, and I think that's important. And so I try to.
I like how you keep touching on shock, if I may interrupt, because in the sense of, because of what Christie does is she'll continuously shock people, but it's always with a message, much like what you'll continuously do in your horrors. There's an underlining message, and that's what I like about, I guess, what Christie does, and what I like about what you're doing is both times it isn't just for the surface of just to shock you or just to horrify you. It's to be able to open you up enough to see, okay, now that I got your attention, do you see the message? I mean, am I wrong, Christie? I mean, that's what I always see from your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I do it and people like start laughing, but then they kind of think about it. It's like, oh wow, But it's like there are some people that get mad about it, and I'm like, whatever, because it's like, this is what goes through my mind. Do I want to go and deny that? No. So it's like, and it's just like lately I've been just drawing these, I guess you would call them political cartoons, but it's just like of all the news feeds I've read and what sticks in my mind the most, and I put together this stupid picture. So it's absolutely ludicrous. So there's no same thing with Demon Bitch. I think Demon Bitch is the same way too.
Yeah, and like regardless of how people take things, like Christie's are, like if people are going to get mad about it, even if they're mad about it, like there's inherent value in putting up something that's your actual feelings or whatever raw images you're putting up, something that's not curated to appeal to masses, and that's not the point. The point isn't to make you happy about it. Like the point is just to put what's there, and then they can like it or they don't. And so I like that.
Which is a very valid point that you bring up. And that's something I think a lot of people miss, is that sometimes the reaction that they're getting is intended. You know, sometimes that's the intended reaction that you guys are getting. I mean, obviously you don't want to anger anyone, but at the same point, if you get a reaction of maybe an emotion or a feeling, that was the goal, right? I mean, if nothing else, now they're actually open up to actually consider something that they may never consider before. So in a case of, as we may segue into some of the future works, getting to Sweetheart, I think there was a lot of misunderstandings of what diabetes is, or those who suffer from diabetes, or what those who are treating themselves with diabetes actually go through. And I think the story of Sweetheart really exhibits a way to explain to people, especially those that don't know, some of the, I guess, monkey on the shoulder, demon on the shoulder aspects of what it's like to have diabetes, type 1, type 2, or any other form of lifelong disease.
Yeah, so on the diabetes part and the misconceptions, there are a lot of times where I will, through the course of conversation, tell somebody that I'm a type 1 diabetic, and they're a little taken aback, and they're like, "Well, you're not fat," and I was like, "No," and I mean, thanks, I guess, but no, I'm not, and that's not really.
You don't need to be fat to be diabetic.
Yeah, so first, like, that's, I mean, in the most general sense, like, that's usually type 2 diabetics, and I'm type 1, and then there's these differences in how they actually work. But then even when you go with that understanding, like, people will assign blame to people that do have type 2, and a lot of times, like, it's not their fault. Like, I mean, it can be self-inflicted, but there are oftentimes other underlying issues that make them more susceptible to it, and that's not their fault in the least. And so I think it's important to sort of distinguish those two, that yes, the two types are different, but that even when you understand the two types, that it's not what you may think it is. And so, yeah, and with type 1 diabetes, people are like, well, you're not fat, like this and that, like, why don't you just exercise or do whatever? Like, well, you can't do that with type 1. It's always there, it's always going to be there. And everyone's like, well, I heard that if you go on a raw food diet, that it'll actually fix it. And it's like, again, that's probably more of a type 2 thing. It's not going to work with type 1 because of genetic reasons. And sorry, that's my insulin pump. It's beeping at me.
It's okay.
No, I totally get it. You totally understand too.
Yeah, like, I kind of had a brush with that. I think I remember telling you, Dillon, last time you were there, like, I had a pancreatic tumor. Nothing. It just happened. It was one of those. I fit in the racial group. They have no idea how it starts. It just starts with Asian and Black women, and I just got it over at 70% of my pancreas. You know, I was actually relatively healthy aside from being overweight, but the pancreas was actually making me overweight, not me.
Yeah.
So so I mean, they told me I would be diabetic. So it's like, you know, I mean, there is like, there are people that treat their bodies like shit, and that eventually happens. But more often than not, when I've met a person with diabetes that was born with it, or it's an onset, usually they wouldn't fit in the stereotypical, like, they're fat. They're like actually pretty thin. Like, my dad has type 2.
Sure.
And he got it when he was like 71. So, I mean, you can become diabetic due to obesity, but that's a whole other thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you're fat, you know?
Right.
Some people are just born with it, or it just happens.
Yeah. And then again, with both types, like, their battles they're very similar, but they're also very unique in their own way. And so the way that you have to manage each one is extremely different. So with type 1, it's almost more unpredictable, you could say, because you're trying to manually bring your blood sugar up and down with injections. and with exercise and with all these things. Whereas with type 2, and again, I'm speaking again in the most general sense, it can often be treated just by taking metformin or whatever medication that you're given. Like you just take a pill, and then that just makes your body more reactive, and then it can sort of regulate itself. You're just allowing it to regulate itself. Which in a way can be easier, but at the same time, if you don't do that, it can be much more destructive because of the way that your body has gotten to type 2 diabetes. It's already in the process of sort of destroying itself, and so it can be a much more vicious, much more terrible thing. And so they're both just terrible in their own ways. And so I tried to highlight that with Sweetheart, and then there are, as the story went along, it sort of became apparent that this is also very applicable to other chronic ailments like addiction, cancer, the loss of a loved one, things like that. And so, it's all about. I mean, a big part of the message of the story is paying attention to the monster that's ailing you, but not allowing it to control you. And so you just have to understand the monster that you're fighting is a lot of what it's about.
Well, also what's kind of indicated to me with diabetes, and again, this is probably not the most educated response, but it's just a gut response. I think of those chalky, really overly, like the Sweetheart candies where they say "I love you" and all that.
Yeah,
and just eating that chalky shit, like it's like a institution, but it's like you realize like this would not be the candy you would normally eat. Like eat them and you're like, oh, like you actually kind of want to throw up on how much sugar it has,
Right.
But yeah, it makes me think of that too, kind of in a way. It's sort of odd, but it kind of makes it more applicable to diabetes in that sense. Like when you explain it, it's like, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, that's an angle that I hadn't considered, honestly, is the chalky bitterness of that crappy candy.
It's actually a fair analogy too. So
good.
For the community to go ahead and we can bring in some of that's exactly what we're speaking about. Could you explain to the community who may not be familiar with Sweetheart the exact elevator pitch behind this awesome and wonderful storyline?
Oh yeah, look at that. So Sweetheart is the quick and dirty elevator pitch of it is it's kind of like Stephen King's It, but there's more than one Pennywise, and the entire town knows about them. And so we start with this family who has been chosen by one of these monsters that live in the town. And once a monster chooses you, it will stay with you your entire life until it successfully kills you. And so you find out as the story goes that it not only sticks with you your entire life, but once you're gone, it has a high chance of then choosing someone of your same lineage, and so someone with your same bloodline. And so it's sort of this family struggle to fight these monsters in a town that has grown all too comfortable with their existence. And so it's sort of a battle against the monsters, and then also the apathy of the town itself.
Now, the artist that you chose for this, I've been following him. I've been following his work, and every successive issue, he just, I hope he did as much wonderment in your eyes as he did in mine, because every picture, every panel, it's not just there was a feeling attached. Yeah, everything there's so much emotion attached to every panel that for instance, when I gave her the books, I had noticed that when she went from 3 to 4, the difference in timing that she read 3 to 4 was amazing. It only took a few minutes for her to read issue 3. But when she got to issue 4, she was so involved that I bet you she got immersed, because it took her a few minutes to finish. So really what I'm getting at is when you did this work with your artist, when you received panels back, when you received the art back, what was your response?
I think this is what you're getting at, but so with each successive issue, we were more and more on the same page as it went on. And so the first issue that we did, Francesco and I, we were still trying to get to know each other a little bit. We weren't sure what each other's strengths were, or how to interpret each other's feedback and things like that. And so the first issue I think is still incredible, but you can really tell that as it goes on, like we were more and more in sync as it went. And so all the way until the very last issue, I was continually more and more excited and more impressed. Yeah, that one. It's amazing. So I suggested that one, that cover, I think for issue 4. No, it was for issue 3, and he was like, "No, I have this other idea for Maddie in the flex pose," and I was like, "That's do it. That sounds amazing." And so that's one of the examples for how we got more comfortable with each other. And so if I suggested something and he thought he had a better idea, he would bring it up to me, and like more often than not, because he's the artist and he knows better than I do what's going to work well visually. I'm like, you're a genius. Do it. That sounds great. Let's work on it. And so with each one that went, I loved it more and more. He got better as he went. I got better as I went, and we got better with each other as we went, for sure. I see in the comments over here, I saw somebody wrote that they have type 2 diabetes and they take metformin and they do the shots of insulin both every day. That is something that can happen. Yeah. Yep. And so that is something that we actually it's an idea that I have had and wanted to incorporate in the story for a long time. And we didn't quite get there. It didn't have a place in the story we were telling. And I am not saying that we are doing more. I'm not saying that. But if we did, then that is something that I want to explore further in the future. And so that concept, that's really rough. And you have my sympathies for that. That's a tough thing to manage, to do both of them. But yeah, I wanted to explore that a little bit in the future, if ever given the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kenneth. And yeah, man, my daughter here, she's going on how many years now?
7
years.
Type 7 years of being a type 1.
Yeah.
So
how did you guys find out?
Mm-hmm.
So
I had gotten really sick.
Yeah.
Sorry. I had gotten really sick and lost a lot of weight, and so then I just got my blood tested and they were like, "Oh yeah, no." I was like at 600 or something.
Yeah.
So I didn't go until the next morning, and that was like a proper blood test out of my arm. So I'm lucky I didn't go into DKA that night.
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah, I think.
Wait, she's not really telling you the part of it. Well, she was losing weight. We took her to the doctors. They thought that something was she just needed to eat more. So we took her to dinner and packed her full of food. Full of all kinds of carbs, you name it, sugars. Yeah. She was eating barbecue ribs at night and stacked potato and just
mac and cheese.
Loaded up. And I went to her. What was it about? I don't know. Within 12 hours, I woke her up. The doctor, who was on a flight to go to Hawaii.
Yeah. With her family, she had 20 family members with her. She
rushed the results back because she just didn't have a right feeling, and she knew she was going on vacation. She called us right before she boarded her flight and said, "Look, you got 2 options. You can either hang up with me right now and call the paramedic, or you can hang up with me right now, grab your daughter, and take her to the hospital."
Man.
Oh wow.
That's
when she got there. You were scratching at 800.
No, when I got there, I think I was down to 3.
No, when they tested her, I think she was scratching at 800. I don't think you got conscious until you probably hit 3.
What?
You were gone. Anyways,
I don't even remember.
So, and that's another thing. You know what I mean? So this story really shows the terror, the horror, the what it takes to go through having a lifelong disease. And with her now 7 years and now having a pump, which you were telling me you now have a pump.
Oh my God, the pump's a life changer. It's so awesome, the pump.
that, I mean, it's before that it was literally having that monster over your shoulder, and you knew that it wasn't as easy as drinking some tonic, as much as you knew that you had to stab yourself once to find out how you had to stab yourself again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's rough. I think when I found out, I was in the mid 700s, and I was like 6 years old. We were on a road trip to Minnesota to see my grandparents.
Oh wow!
And the way we found out is like I was feeling really sick, and my mom was like, "Oh, you're just car sick." And then I had to pee every 5 minutes, and then she was like, "You're not allowed to have any more water. You can't have any more water because you're just gonna pee." And then like I remember at one of the rest stops, I was telling my brother how thirsty I was, and he was like, "You can have a sip of water. Just don't tell mom." And then like I had a little sip of water, and then 5 minutes later I had to pee again. And then like I started wetting the bed, and then it sort of became an issue, and I got more and more sick. And then we went to the hospital, and I remember my mom sitting in the car after we got the test results. I didn't know what the test results were. I was like 5 or 6 years old. And I just remember sitting in the car, and she starts crying, and she's like, I hope that's not what it is. And I was like, Mom, what's going on? What's wrong? And she was like, it's nothing. You just like, you might be sick. And so we're going to go home, and they're going to call us. And they didn't even keep me in the hospital that night. I didn't go back to the hospital until the next day, until the next morning. And then I remember my brother, like, so my brother, speaking of misconceptions, so my brother had this idea that like when you're doing injections, if you get an air bubble in the syringe, that like you could die. And like I've accidentally injected like very large air bubbles, but like
that's what I thought too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
When I first was doing it, I was so scared. I was like, wait, if I get an air bubble, I die, right?
R.L. Stein like perpetuated that, because I remember reading Remember Me, and it was like, you know, she got pushed off and she was dead, and her brother was diabetic, and she finds all these things, but how like this girl's the girl that killed her, actually it's like this whole thing, and I don't want to give away the book, but anyway, her brother's a type 1 diabetic, so she draws in a lot of air and like tries to kill him that way, and then she has to puncture the air bubble basically.
And so, and like there's a weird amount of pseudo truth to that. Like if you inject air bubbles into your bloodstream, like into an artery or into a vein, like it might kill you. Yeah. But like insulin doesn't go into the vein. It goes into the adipose, it goes into the fatty tissue. And like, that's not good for you, but like, it's not going to kill you to do it. And so when we were leaving, when we were pulling, my mom was driving me to the hospital, and we were leaving our grandparents' house. And I remember my brother like crying outside the car, just shouting that if you get an air bubble in it, he's gonna die. And like, it's a lot to take in when you're that old. Like Khalees, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
12. So I was kind of old. Yeah, it was a weird time.
but all the same, like that's got some goods and bads to it as well. Like when you're 12, like you're maybe a little more equipped to handle like the dramatic, change that's going to hit you, and like the concept of death is like a little bit more developed in your mind. But also when you're 12, like you already have a life, kind of like you have a routine. Like you're used to drinking regular soda, you're used to eating as much candy as you want, you're used to doing whatever. Like you have a lifestyle. Like when I was 6, like I didn't have that. Like I didn't drink a whole soda or anything. And so like the life change for me wasn't too difficult of a transition, but when you're 12, like it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
And so that's rough.
Yeah. I feel like I haven't even been able to do that transition. So
yeah. It's
saying she's still drinking sodas and still drinking crap and eating candy. Mm-hmm. That's what she's saying.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, another misconception is that like you can't ever have a soda because you're diabetic and it could kill you. Like, I mean, sure, if everything else is managed incredibly poorly, then maybe, yeah. But like in reality, like as long as if you have it in probably more moderation than most people, and then you just monitor your blood sugar, and then when if you anticipate the increase in blood sugar that the soda is going to bring, like you can counter it with some insulin. Like you'll be okay. Just don't go overboard like everybody else might. But I mean, yeah, it's
and that's
not,
how I really like how you written it, that very aspect into your story. You know, you explain how the overuse of the tonic, you know, down the road, of the fact that if you
abuse it,
then it's not going to be as useful down the road. And I like how you keep touching on aspects that people really need to be educated in. You know, these, like you're saying, these fallacies, these misunderstandings, you know, and how they work their way into the story, not only as an educational purpose, but a way of also explaining the story and actually giving it a little more depth and a little more gravity to it, you know. And I like that, because it made me nervous when I kept thinking, wait, you got enough tonic? Did you leave with enough tonic? But that comes from a father with a diabetic daughter.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, as if you take too much of it, like it over time, it starts to have less of an effect. And like, that's just sort of true, even if you aren't continuously taking way too much. Like, as you get older, you might see that your metabolism isn't working the way it used to. You might have to take a little bit more. But then even when that happens, like I'm sure you've had like unexpected lows or unexpected spikes. Like, even when you think you do everything right, like sometimes it can just come and kick you in the face anyway. And so even when you do things that are right, like you kind of have to be on your toes. You got to be ready to handle it when it comes in. And so, so I tried to put both of those things in there, like this idea that if you use it too much, or you use too much of it, over time, it's gonna work less and less. And then also, even if you do everything right, like that's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee that everything's gonna be okay, right?
Yeah, sometimes, like with my condition, even though I don't have diabetes, but it's kind of weird because I have less of a pancreas, so it's something I have to kind of consider, because I have to take Creon right now, which is a pancreatic digestive enzyme to make up for the loss of pancreas. And it's variable. It can either be a few months to a few years that I have to take this, to even for the rest of my life. So, but even like, as a woman, you can go through monthly cycles that messes with your digestive system because of all the endocrine functions. And I noticed this before I went through the operation, but it didn't affect me as severely. But now it's like, that's what I'm seeing my surgeon about, is like, okay, when I go through these things, what do I do? You know, and so I have to fine tune things. So it's like, I sort of understand that to a level without getting too into it.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, you hit it for sure.
If I could take this moment to actually do a little promotion, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to show everyone behind me what you're seeing is Sweetheart 1 through 5. Everything is out. Everything is obtainable. And if you're having difficulty, you can get a hold of me and I'll even find these things for you. Dillon, can you tell us exactly, is there a tentative date when you have a trade paperback coming out for this project?
There absolutely is. And so the trade paperback right now is scheduled to be released on September 23rd. And so it's coming up real soon. I think that's next week, isn't it?
23rd. It's like about 6 days from now. So about a week.
Yeah. So it's coming out. It's coming out next week. If you haven't pre-ordered it at your comic shop, I would encourage you to do so. There's a high chance that they'll have it anyway, but definitely ask them for it if you haven't already, just to make sure that they got one in there. They got it down there for $12.74. The base retail price is $14.99. I'm running a Twitter promotion for it right now. If you find one in the wild, I mean, I want you to buy it, obviously, but you don't even have to buy it. If you find one in the wild and you just take a picture of yourself with it, and then you post it on Twitter and tag me or Francesco, I'm going to give away on the 31st. I'm going to give away one of 3 swag prizes, and so the first one, it's just going to be assigned randomly, and so everyone has an equal chance to win one of these things. And so the first one is a signed variant cover of that one you have in the front right here. I've got one right here as well. So this Chris DeBari, Simon Go variant cover. It'll be a signed issue of that. So that'll be the first of the possible 3 prizes. The second one is this tote bag that we have. That we made back when we were back in our Kickstarter days, and so this is a vintage little tote bag.
Cool. Damn.
got the stringer on the back of it.
Oh shit!
Oh, that's really cool. Sorry.
And then the third and final one that I think is the coolest one is this T-shirt that I'm wearing, the Sweetheart T-shirt, right here. These. I was shocked at how incredibly high quality these were, because they weren't terribly expensive for us to get for our Kickstarter.
That's rad. Yeah, we're gonna end up talking later after the show.
Yeah, if you wanna talk after the show, we can hook you up.
She already hit me up.
Yeah, so like I've had this shirt for almost 2 years now, and like it's gone through the wash, it's gone through hell and back. I wear it to shows. Like it still feels fresh as the day as I unboxed it. So
is it digital or is it screen printed?
Excuse me, it's screen printed, which I thought it would crack and fall off, but like it hasn't, and it looks great.
That's killer. I mean, so you heard it here. So basically, what Dillon just said is, look, this releases next Wednesday. You find one of these things at your shop, take a picture of yourself. Even if you buy it, take a picture of yourself with this book at the shop. Plug in the shop, plug in your name, go ahead and tag Dillon so he can see this thing, and you'll be entered into what he just showed you, one of those 3 swag items that you want to get rid of. That, would you say, at the end of September?
Yep. And so the promotion runs for a full week of the first week of release. And so from the 23rd until the 30th, you have a chance to take a picture and send it. So even if you can't get to your shop on New Comic Book Day, you have the whole weekend and a little bit of the next week to sort of get in there and get your picture. And so take a picture of it, send it in, and then the following day on the 31st is when I will announce the winners.
That's awesome. So that means that you're going to have to go ahead, go into the description below, go ahead and follow them on any and all the social networks. I recommend all. And that way you can go ahead and tag them. That way you won't miss out on your opportunity. Dillon, I have to ask, since we've so much fallen in love with this project, I have a feeling, I have a flavor of what your writing style is like. Can you tell us anything about any future projects that you're coming up with?
So I already talked about Draft Dodger a little bit. That's a project that I'm going to be honest, it stalled a little bit. We're sort of working through some details with that one. But that's one that I'm still actively working on, is Draft Dodger. I have another one that isn't comic book related. I'm actually writing my first novel called Grand Design. That started out as a comic book concept, and then we realized was much more well suited for long form, for prose. And so I'm about halfway through that one. I'm hoping to have it finished by the beginning of 2021. And so we'll see how that progresses. Oh yeah! Oh my gosh! Look at this. Yeah, I haven't seen this page in forever. I haven't visited it in a while. Yeah, so this is some of the initial art we did for Grand Design, and so you can see this guy here at the top, this little pink squid guy. We nicknamed him the Jelly Squid Kid. Okay. And the idea, and you can kind of see that in these 3 pages here. The idea is that the universe is a plant, and instead of growing in soil, it actually grows in time. And so time is the soil that it grows in. And so the concept is that everything grows in time, is sort of the deep philosophical statement of kind of a thing. And so we just sort of ran with that, and then we just pretended like itself was a plant. Anyway, I love those pages.
Now, as far as page content, what are you talking as far as content, as far as how many pages are you looking at, and is there going to be any form of graphics in there, or almost exclusively just?
Yeah, so the guy who did those 3 pages that you saw, his name is Max Malcolm. He's one of my best friends from college. I've spoken with him. We might throw some of the art into the book, like maybe as like page breaks, or as like chapter starts, or just like put them in the back just as some additional content. I might commission him as well to do the cover for the novel. So yeah, there's a chance those might be in there.
Sounds like a really interesting project.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. You will be keeping us surprised as your progress happens, and then when it gets close to launch date, possibly come back on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to come back. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, especially, I mean, look what JB's done. How could you not want to be immersed in this? This is fun.
Definitely.
Hey, I know that you work nights. I know that you've taken out time in your schedule to be here with us, and we greatly appreciate it. We really do. Before and wish that we leave, is there anything that you would like to communicate to the community about not only this book and future projects, but anything that you may have coming up or any message you would like to give to the community out there before which we end the show?
Keep an eye out for Draft Dodger. We're gonna be making moves on that hopefully soon. You can find any of my stuff. You can find me on Twitter at Dillon Gilbertson. That's on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find a lot of my works on my website. I have print versions of a lot of my stories, and so if you want a copy, just hit me up. I can hook you up. And then I guess the message that I'd want to leave people with is what I was saying earlier about horror, is that like there's some scary shit going on, and a lot of it's very real. But I mean, the backing away from it is not the answer. That's not gonna help you. That's not gonna help anybody else. The best thing you can do is that you stand up to it and you look at it, and then more often than not, you're gonna find out that it's something that you can beat. And so, but you're never gonna know until you look at it.
Man, Dillon, thank you again. I appreciate you being here. I really do. Hey, Christy, I know that you a long week. I know that you've changed your schedule and everything to be here with us too. Is there anything that you can throw out the community that what's coming up with you in the future?
Well, right now I'm working and testing out I'm trying to get more of Demon Bitch also into the retail stores. So I'm looking at that angle. Nothing has happened more concretely now, as I'm kind of waiting for samples and things, to figure out pricing of the book and everything. But it'll be basically a different edition than the graphic novels. This will actually be a smaller edition, like 25 pages, so people could pick it up. I'm guessing the retail, I'm thinking probably at the most $4, but that might be a little less or anything. I have to take a look at the materials and see how much I can put it out in retailers. But I'm looking at a way to kind of put that out in the retail sphere.
Cool. Well, hey, community, we appreciate you being here, and as always, we're going to maintain the Saturdays. This was a way to go ahead, and I know because Dillon has been working to try to get him in here, and being that the book just dropped, and I knew that the trade was coming up, I wanted to kind of fit him in between to try to get some sales on this book to get you guys to read this killer book. And I'm seeing that you can the discount mugs and stuff like that. Okay, so sorry, it was going off on a tangent there. But I appreciate everyone being here. We are going to do this Saturday. We're going to be talking about our calendar coming up. And as we get closer to Dillon's next project, hopefully we'll have him on here soon. And I think that's everything. Yes, Khalees?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
From us at 12 Comic Talk, we appreciate you. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.